We are going to get started. It is session 4 of the CPC Online Language Justice Training. We have a very special guest today, my friend, co-worker, comadre, Andrea Golden, who also works for CPC in the Language Justice Circle. Since this is the first time that Andrea is on the call, I was hoping that we could give her like a little taste of who's on the call today. And so I'm going to say something, like read a statement, and if it's true for you, I'm going to ask you to show Golden that it's true for you, okay? Since y'all are on mute, you have to like show us. So, for example, if I say you are in Tennessee, then you would show us if you're in Tennessee. Or maybe you're in Texas. If you are in North Carolina. If you are in Georgia. If you're in Kentucky. And if you're in Alabama. That's right. And I think we have Louisiana. Yeah! So now if you can show us who does more consecutive interpretation. If the majority of the interpretation that you do is consecutive interpretation, can you show us? And if you do more simultaneous, interpreting. Yeah. Excellent. If you have been on at least 2 of these sessions, if you have participated in at least 2, if you terp between Spanish and English, that's everybody right now. The other folks aren't on yet. Okay. And will you show us if you interpret like in a medical setting, folks who interpret in a medical setting? What about folks who interpret more like for the community or social justice interpret? Mm-hmm. What about for your family? Folks that interpret for their families? Mm-hmm. Folks who do conference interpreting? Are there conference interpreters? And lastly, legal. Are there folks that do interpreting in a legal setting? Yeah. Awesome. So, Golden is going to help us with today's session, which is going to be on interpreter role and ethic. But before, I have 2 announcements. One is, I'm going to try to sell you the CPC Language Justice Curriculum. If you don't have one of these already, this is a great resource for training interpreters. It came out of all of these different trainings and practice sessions that we've done over the years. It's got 7 chapters, including role and ethic, 2 actually on role and ethic. For $23.95, a paper copy can be yours. It's on the website. I'll drop a link in the chat box. It's also free online at CPC's website, but for those of us that like binded notebooks with paper, one of these can be yours. That's the first announcement. And then the second thing that I wanted to ask or say is that, this has been a free online training. I feel like I have been paid by you all. This online training has given me the opportunity to get to know folks that I normally would not know and to build with people across the South doing this language justice work. And that's also something that I couldn't have done without this online training. So I've also been paid by looking at your lovely faces and your smiles and looking at you all and hearing your brilliance and learning from you. If you feel moved to make a donation to CPC, to support our language justice work. I'm also going to drop a little link in the chat box, and you can make a one-time donation, and that would be greatly, greatly appreciated. Although I also know that folks are giving their time and treasure being on these calls. But if you're moved and you want to make a donation, I'm going to drop that in the chat. Okay. So many folks, when they signed up, asked about interpreter role and ethics. And so we're going to do 2 sessions. Today's session and the last session next week, they're both going to be focused on interpreter role and ethic. And today's session is going to focus more on when we're actually interpreting. See? So like when you're on the mic or when you're with a client or when you're actually interpreting. And then next week's is going to be a broader role and ethic. And there's no one better to do this part of this work than Golden. So I have recruited her to help us with this part.
Thank you, Ada. No pressure. Thank you for that. Hey, everybody. It's so nice to meet you and see you. I just want to say that Ada has been telling me so much about this, and I'm just super excited to see you all tonight. So like Ada said, tonight we're going to look at role and ethic while we're interpreting. And I know that y'all have already spent time talking about like the kinds of decisions that you make around word choices when you're interpreting, and kind of recognizing that we're not just robots that are like input output with no decisions. But I think it's also important to explore, and what we'll explore tonight is that there's all sorts of other decisions that we're making all the time while we're interpreting. And sometimes we're aware of them and sometimes we're not aware of them. And the decisions that we make are really informed by our personal values, our personal experiences, our identities. And so we're going to spend some time looking at why are we making the decisions we make, how does that impact the interpretation and the message. And we think that the best way to do that is just to kind of jump in and start exploring it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give you a scenario. You'll divide up into small groups. Ada will send you to your groups. She knows about this Zoom thing more than I do. She'll send you into your groups. You'll talk about them, and then you're going to bring a decision back to share to everyone else. So I'm going to share the scenario and try to pay like really close attention, so that you're ready to break out in your group and just kind of jump in and talk about what you think. Does that sound good? Okay, here we go. I'm going to set the scene. There's an interpreter, there's a doctor, and there's a patient. The patient is an elderly person of the interpreter's same race, ethnicity, nationality, or cultural background. The doctor asks the patient, "How's it going for you with the pills that we prescribed to you last month?" The patient turns and says to the interpreter, "You know our people don't take those pills. I'm drinking tea and it's working great for me. But just tell him that the pills are working fine." What should the interpreter do? Dun dun. So Ada's going to send you into some small groups. You've got 5 minutes to talk about it. Try to hear from everybody, their reaction, how are you feeling, what are you thinking, and in the end, try to land on your group's recommendation for that interpreter and why. Does that sound good?
Can we do a brief, again, like what's the scenario, because some new folks joined.
Oh, sure, okay. So repeat the whole scenario again?
Pero así breve.
Okay, the scenario is that there's an interpreter, a doctor, and a patient. The patient feels some sort of an affinity with the interpreter. The doctor says, how's it going with those pills I gave you? The patient says, the interpreter, "I'm not taking those pills. I've been drinking tea, but it's going fine. Just tell them the pills are fine." What should the interpreter do? Does that sound good? Is the scenario clear? Okay, so we'll send you to your rooms for about 5 minutes, and good luck.
I think we're waiting for one more group. There they come. Lisa.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we want to hear from each of the groups. And I don't know if we should maybe give a little bit of a background for Pravina, what just happened?
Sure.
Yeah. So, hi Pravina, I'm Andrea. I'm here with y'all tonight, and we were just in small groups talking about a scenario of an interpreter at a medical appointment, and the doctor asked the patient, hey, how are the pills working out that I prescribed for you? And the patient said to the interpreter, oh, I'm not taking those pills, but tell him that it's going fine. And what should the interpreter do? And so we're going to hear back from each of the groups about what y'all talked about, how you felt, what you decided, what's your recommendation. So could we start with group 1?
Who was in group 1?
Maybe if one of y'all wants to start, and then if any of the other members of that group feel like anything's missing, feel free to jump in.
Come on, group 1, you can do it.
I was just going to unmute someone.
I'm just going to unmute Catalina unless okay.
Okay. Yeah, so we spent a while kind of just saying like hindsight 2020 kind of we should have began the appointment by saying, this is my role. My role is to interpret everything that's said, and it's not anything beyond that. And then we got a little bit into reminding the patient of that, and didn't settle comfortably with whether or not we should interpret exactly what was said or what the patient wanted to be said. I was thinking that in some sort of like theoretical way, the role of the interpreter is to make the situation as much like if the two people could communicate using the same language as possible, despite that not being possible. And in that case, the patient would have lied. And so when you kind of want to do that for them, if they kind of trusted that you wouldn't say what was said, you don't necessarily have to break a person's trust. But also in court interpreting trainings I've done, it seems like the code of ethics falls a lot more on the side of you have to say everything that was said, even if it's clear that the person didn't really understand what the dynamic was. But that feels wrong, and so I'd love to hear what other people say.
And before we hear from other groups, are there others from group 1 that would want to add something? Were there any differing opinions or anything that's kind of missing from y'all's conversation?
No, Catalina said what I feel like what we discussed most, but towards the end I added that I would not interpret like directly what that person said. If the person told me not to say something, I would not say it. I would not say something without their consent, especially if there's an affinity. So if you're talking to like a white doctor, I would not share with this person who shares my identity. So I think like it is a really tricky situation. But when a person tells me not to say something and they're saying it in confidence, I wouldn't say it even if like, the courts or legality is against me in that sense. But reminding the person that it puts me as an interpreter in a really difficult position, and that like moving forward, like maybe considering that like everything that they tell me, if it's okay, I just interpret that directly. Yeah.
Okay, great. How about group 2?
I'm from group 2, and we spoke about, as the interpreter, to be as objective as possible. So in that situation, it would be we had some people in the group saying maybe we would communicate with the patient again, like, I'm going to interpret everything that you just said, and then see what their reaction was. But then it was a whole nother conversation of, are they going to get upset? And then you're also leaving the doctor out of the conversation, because then now we're just talking. So kind of what we decided as a group, we had said that we would try to be as objective as possible and to interpret what the patient had said, so the doctor can be in the know because that's what we're there for. So.
Okay, are there any other things from group 2 that you all want to share? Everybody came to that conclusion at the end that you would just say exactly what the patient said? Okay, and how about group 3? Someone from group 3 want to kind of raise their hand? Who all was in group 3? Uh-huh.
Okay, so we, for the most part, settled on that we would translate or interpret directly what was being said. But Hennessy was saying how working as a community liaison, I don't know what it was, but they'd been in both clinical and just community settings, and they did feel the need to kind of not break that confidence, as they were saying in group 1. But the end result was that we would stick to exactly what they'd said. Right?
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think this overall is just like the difficulty of like, if it's someone who trusts you from like a same community, it's hard to maybe like say something that might end up like hurting them some way, whether it's like their connection with the doctor or anything, but then at the same time, it's like important to interpret these conversations and like be as objective, just because maybe you might, as an interpreter, like you're there to facilitate the conversation, but maybe it'll lead to like other conversations to where if they have this situation with their doctor, it might open up the doctor's view and like, okay, so actually let's talk about a point of treatment or point of care that actually will benefit you if you don't feel comfortable with this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you want to say something there?
No, I think that's great, right? I think that as interpreters, sometimes, especially like y'all were saying, when it's someone that we have an affinity with for whatever reason, right? Like I've been there before, they remind me of my grandma, we speak the same language, we're from the same part of the world. That trust can build really quickly. But I think that Hennessy's, I totally agree with, like, you never know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you never know if that tea that they're taking would counter, with the pill. You never know whether the doctor's like, great, let's get rid of that pill. Like, let's get you what you need. Like, you're making a ton of assumptions by saying like, well, we have confidence here. This is a person I've never met before, but we're both from, X, Y, or Z. And so I think that's, I think just those checking in with ourselves, and it's like when we think we know more than doctors, when we think we know more than lawyers, when we think we know more than whatever, judges, whatever, when we think we know more than principals,
Mm-hmm.
and kind of checking in with ourselves around what is that about. And like Catalina said, interpreting puts you in these situations where normally we would not be if we were in our home country. And so you are there with this very special role. But I think that if you weren't there, like what would the communication be like if you weren't there?
And I heard that, the point that was raised about like, well, if I wasn't there, then the person wouldn't have had an interpreter to turn to and say, I'm not taking it, but say that I did. And so you get into this place where now you're trying to decide, would they have said that? What would they have said? Who would they have said that to? Would they have kept that to themselves? And so you're trying to make all of these decisions really quickly. And I think that it was interesting that the first point that was brought up was the importance of that pre-session.
Mm-hmm.
And because if you start your session saying, I will say everything that you say, that's my ethic, that's what I'm bound to, then from the get-go you're setting that up. Sometimes that will inform the people that you're interpreting for, and sometimes it won't, and they will still say something anyway. And so you can face a series of decisions along the way. Oftentimes when Ada and I were together in interpreter trainings, there's this like rising frustration, and you all are on mute, so I can't really tell like how frustrated are you feeling. But I know that feeling where you're like, tell me the answer. Do I say it? Do I not say it? Do I say to the patient, oh, I have to repeat that warning, I'm about to repeat it? Do you say to the doctor, I think the patient didn't understand, can you repeat the question? There's not an answer that we can say to you. Because we are all interpreters in the world, and we know how tricky it is to make those decisions on the spot. So it's interesting to hear from you all. Well, I would have avoided it altogether because I would have done a pre-session. Check. Good. I wouldn't have said it because my highest ethic is consent. Mm-hmm. And that person explicitly told me, I don't consent to you repeating this. To me, that ethic speaks stronger than whatever I may or may not have said in the pre-session. Others of you are saying, my highest ethic is interpreting everything that was said. I cannot leave that doctor out. Maybe because I could be fired, maybe because they wouldn't trust me anymore, maybe because it could damage the patient's health, whatever your thought process is. There are these 3 different decisions that you all came to through different processes, and Ada and I are here to say, like, todas se valen. They all came from a really strong logic and practice and ethic, and that's what makes this so complicated. Yeah? Mm-hmm. So keep going? Yeah. Because we want to make it even more complicated.
So I'll just say, we're going to play a game called Agree or Disagree.
And you can't be unsure. You must agree or disagree. And we're going to play this game because we just spent a couple minutes talking about one decision. One decision that maybe one day you'll have to make as an interpreter. But we know that you, in your life as an interpreter, will make many, 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 many decisions. And so we want to just take some time to explore like different kinds of decisions that would come up. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And we had talked about before when we did the vocab training about how you're making word choices. And so at the same time that we're making word choices and volume choices and tone choices, we're also making these choices that have to do with our values, what we value in the world, what we think is important. So here we go. Agree or disagree. Agree or disagree. You're going to tell us whether you agree. We're so stupid. Or you're going to tell us whether you disagree. Okay?
I wanted to make like cards that you all could hold up, but it was too complicated from afar. So we're going to use our thumbs. Sound good? Do we agree that that was terrible. Okay. Here we go. You are interpreting at a public event, and the speaker says, we'd like to thank the translators in the back. You interpret, we'd like to thank the interpreters in the back. Agree, disagree. Ooh, this is gonna be so good.
All right. Eileen, you right away said agree. How come?
Hear me? Because I feel that if they're, if they would thank other people, you would translate that. And, if they're thanking you, you're part of that conversation at that moment, I think.
What about other folks who agreed? Who else agreed?
I think it's, to me, exactly what you just said. I think it's like a translation of what they meant, because that is such a common misconception of translator and interpreter. But I know what they mean, right? That is what they meant, is they meant the people who are doing the interpretation. So
I chose agree because I believe that you're trying to interpret meaning, and obviously like you want to use the words as close as possible, but if you're interpreting that meaning, the correct word would be interpreter.
Gabriel, you had a big old thumbs down. How come?
I didn't have a big old thumbs up down. It's just you can't see it on my shirt. So I like had it up here on my forehead. Yeah, because then it you can see it, yeah, better that way. Um, for me, I think accuracy is more important to me in this moment. I do agree, right, that we are working on meaning, and that we're trying to interpret meaning, but that is when we don't know the word, or that is when we need to expand or contract, or we need to get that meaning across quickly and effectively. But we know the word for translate in Spanish. And so we have to use that word because that's the word that the person said. And, you know, we're there to bridge that gap. And if there was no language barrier, everyone would hear a translator. They wouldn't hear interpreter. And so how do we make sure that if there is no language barrier, that we're communicating what the person said?
Awesome. Okay, do the next one?
Yeah.
Okay, next one.
You are interpreting between a teacher and a parent. The teacher asks why the parent's son hasn't come in for after-school homework help. The mother turns to you and says, I've heard that the teacher is gay. I don't want my son around him alone. Just tell him that we found a private tutor. The interpreter says, I heard that the teacher is gay and I don't want my son around him alone. Just tell him we found a tutor. Agree, disagree.
Ooh. Anna's still thinking. Is there any disagree? Oh, wow. Okay. So, Maria, do you want to say why agree?
Okay. Yes, I mean, we're there to provide literal interpretation of the information that has been said, especially if we have been clear prior to what we're supposed to do. That's exactly what we're there for. And what I'm thinking is that the mom is not telling the interpreter, oh, don't say that or don't do that. The mom is just saying, this is the reason why. So it seems like the mom really wants that information to be provided. So that's why I agree.
Ana Baranda, you took a while, but where did you decide agree?
I guess I was stepping outside of my own objective interpreter role, and I was playing a scenario in my mind of like, am I going to be complicit in this person's homophobia and just be like, oh, they just needed a tutor? But I think at that point, that's not the moment that I can have like an internal discussion. Like I needed to just act quickly, and because the conversation is flowing, so I just like decided like I'm just gonna share exactly what this parent said, and the teacher and the parent will continue this conversation as it needs to play out.
Can I ask something? And so what makes, there's like consensus on this one. What made this one different for you all than the scenario with the patient who said, just tell them this other thing? Why was this one, why did this get more consensus?
I wonder if it has to relate to the fact that the conversation is about the person that they're interpreting to rather than about the other person, if that makes sense. Like the other conversation was solely about like what that person wanted, and now we're involving both of the parties. So I feel like that may have a different reason why people are more like.
Anybody else just thoughts or reflections on what made this different?
Well, I just want to add that regardless of what I think, it's okay or not, even if it breaks my heart inside, it's like even if I disagree from here to, I don't know, the sky, I need to remind myself that I'm there to provide a service. And I think we have to be, but I think myself as this time I need to keep it humble and just be that bridge, that link between. Just wanted to add that.
Okay. Okay, next one.
Yeah.
Oh, this one is a good one. Okay, some of you may have been here before. You are an organizer and a volunteer interpreter with a local campaign to stop deportations. You're at a church interpreting for directly affected families who are sharing their stories, talking about the campaign, and asking for donations. The families start way veering off from the talking points in a way that you feel is damaging for the campaign. You make small edits to the message in a way that's favorable to the campaign goals.
Agree or disagree?
Be real now with us. Oh, no, agree or disagree? Ooh.
Pravina, let's see it. Oh, there's a lot of sideways. There's a lot of sideways. What's happening? What happened?
I'm getting nervous just sitting here.
All right, let's see. I want to hear from Amanda.
Oh man. I think in that moment, like, we did all we could to prepare the people and give them the talking points, and if they want to say something different, it's not my role as an interpreter to edit what they're saying.
Sasa, do you want to add anything to this one?
Yeah, so I've actually been in this situation a couple of times, unfortunately, as an organizer as well as an interpreter. And I think it's also kind of that duality of, like, it's my role to interpret exactly what they're saying. And they are saying X, Y, and Z. Even if I'm uncomfortable with it, even if it's completely off topic, I'm now in the role of an interpreter. So I hope that I'm relying on other organizers who are helping me in the space to be MCs, to be, maintaining the crowd, or to at least, be an accomplice to be like, okay, guess what? We're going to march, or whatever we're doing, if they understand that what I'm interpreting or what they're saying is now veering away from the point, right? Like, you can kind of there's a lot of things that you can do that are not necessarily relying on the interpreter. And also, I think also with that, I would also include, like, self-care in the event that they say something that can be damaging to, like, your personal feelings and identities. I would definitely make sure that's something that's an aspect of after this happens in the event of whatever is said.
Mm-hmm. Is there anyone else that wants to share why they said what they said, or why they're wavering there in the middle?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, if the person didn't need an interpreter, they would have gone off course. They would have said what they were going to say. So as an interpreter, for me to take it upon myself to change their wording without their consent is an abuse of power in my idea. And, like, there are speakers who say things that are off message all the time, and that's part of organizing. It's part of the process of going back and being like, how do we tighten this up? How do we correct this? How do we move forward with this? So to me, it just feels like, it feels really egregious for somebody to say something and for me to be like, well, because where do we put the line then? Like, it benefits me and my campaign, but, when do I then get to say, like, actually, no, I'm not gonna miss it. I'm not gonna, like, change what they're saying. I'm just gonna keep it. So yeah.
Was there anyone who did agree that you? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna add. I think we're all stopping at ourselves, and because the scenario is about us making a decision to change the message, but if we look beyond that and look past that, right? So if we're in the middle, we're that bridge, that means half the people got to cross the bridge. The other people got left behind. If we're that bridge, then that means we only allowed half of the crowd to get the message. And the other half of the crowd believes that the message is something completely different. And that's incredibly, I feel incredibly inappropriate and not organizing. In fact, it's not even organizing.
Yeah, that's really nice. I really like that metaphor.
And with those really compelling arguments as to why you would not change the message, was there anyone who said that you would make some small edits to not blow up your campaign? Or has everyone shifted their decision?
I also think that this always sparks for me the like before we talked about the pre-session and also the after, right? Like after you stopped interpreting, after you leave the church, you sit with the, then you put that organizer hat, because you all talked about like the different hats, and you put that organizer hat and you're like, compas, the talking points, we have another church visit on Wednesday, let's keep to, so that then the next time you get to the bridge, something else might happen. So you still have a chance to, as an organizer, put your 2 cents in, but it comes afterwards. Okay.
Next one? Okay. Next one. You are interpreting for your mom or a beloved family member. We're going to use mom in this case. At an appointment with an attorney. You start to read on your mom's face that she's not totally understanding. You ask the attorney to just pause briefly so you can check in and say, hey mom, are you getting all of this? Agree, disagree.
Stephanie and Genesis can't decide? Okay.
All right.
Okay, awesome. Who hasn't gone? Stephanie, will you say how come? What you thinking?
So for me, I think, so I actually did some interpretation for a family today, and it was a pretty meaty, intense, very important session, and the speaker was talking pretty fast, and it was a lot of terminology, and I just kind of glanced over. I have a rapport with this mom, and I could tell it was just kind of getting a bit overwhelming. So I just kind of like touched her shoulder and was like, did you understand that? And she just was like, no. And so I just asked the speaker if they could just repeat that. So I feel like I'm still providing, that service of not, misconstruing what was said, but just asking the speaker to repeat what they said, which I think is something that we should do or provide. I don't know, to be able to read that social cue that maybe the speaker isn't seeing to who they're speaking to. I don't know.
Does anybody, I know you all agreed, does anyone else want to add a different reason why you agree?
Genesis.
Well, I agreed that definitely checking in, because if don't mind my cat, because my cat's on the way. Because I think that, like if whoever it is that like the lawyer, if they're speaking so fast, where like you also might not be able to understand what they're saying, then it's important to like be like, oh, like, can you give me a pause, or oh, can you actually like slow down, because interpreter can understand, or something's like going on with that misconnection.
So one part of it is you're reading that your mom isn't understanding, and you asked to pause and to check in with her. And then another thing that now you're mentioning is you could put that on you and say interpreter needs you to repeat, and see if that presses reset on the conversation. So I know everyone agreed, and it sounds like the impact that you're looking for is you want your mom to get a full understanding of the information, right? Even though you agree, are there any unintended impacts that this decision that you're going to make might have that you can imagine?
I didn't agree because I was thinking how I was kind of confused because if like that means she's not understanding, or whoever it is, like they're not understanding like what I'm saying through that person. So I guess it's my assumption that, and they would say I don't understand, or otherwise they're saying nothing. I'm kind of confused on like how that plays out, or they're just saying okay, and then you're like, but I don't think you actually know. So that's why I was like, I would assume that they would say I don't, or they would just say nothing to then the doctor would, or whoever it is talking to them would say, do you understand? I don't know.
I would agree with Sophia in that I disagreed as well. I wouldn't tell my mom, I wouldn't stop to be like, Mom, are you okay? Because that goes against the foundations and boundaries we set up at the beginning, which was that I'm going to transmit the message and y'all are talking to each other. If it's a problem with the interpreter, let me know. You know, if it's like I'm not conveying the message, let me know. But if it's you're not understanding the message itself, then you need to ask the person who started that message to repeat or, you know, to clarify something. And I think this is a situation where out of compassion, we rob someone of their agency to ask for help and to express what they need. I think it's in line with all the other consent conversations that we've had, which is we're robbing that person of agency by assuming that they need help because we read their face. We need to make it very clear. If you have a question, you're talking to that person. I'm only relaying the message.
Mm-hmm. You just made me think, right? Because that face could be like, you know, I left the beans on, or oh shit, you know, I've got to text that person back.
I'm daydreaming.
I'm not really listening to what's happening. Oh God. I know Amanda had a hand up.
Yeah, I think that this one's trickier than me. Like if it's a client or something, maybe I would agree to keep going. But this is my mom. Like I'm not, you know, the two hat thing, like I'm not going to take off the daughter hat when I'm interpreting for my mom. And just think if I was there with her and not interpreting, like, and she was making that face, I'd probably be like, are you okay? I would do that anyway. I think maybe a negative consequence is that depending on what it's about, maybe that makes your mom look bad in front of the lawyer or whoever she's talking to. But I don't know. I'm not going to have that same conversation with my mom at the beginning of a thing. I'm still going to be her daughter and interpreting for her at the same time.
Hold on. We're gonna, I feel like all these hands. So we're gonna do a little tweak and keep going.
Okay, so same situation. You are interpreting with an attorney, but this time you are a volunteer interpreter for a community member. So you're a volunteer and interpreter with a community member. You start to read that the community member is looking like what you think is confused, and you ask to pause to make sure everything's okay. Agree, disagree. Volunteer for community member.
All right. Pravina, do you want to say why?
Yeah. So, can you hear me? Yeah, I think one of the reasons when it comes to community members, or for that matter, the previous example as well, there is this some sort of close association that I probably have with like I've been in situations where I have interpreted for someone whom I've worked with or someone whom I've interviewed before as part of, you know, a research that I'm conducting. So they look up to me to kind of as an interpreter, like they don't look up to me to convey their message or anything, but just look up to me for some kind of support. And in terms of and more often than not, they are in positions where they are in situations that they are often constrained because of they might be a domestic violence survivor. They might have fled religious persecution from their home countries. So they feel that their agencies are often constrained, and out of that fear, don't really express how they feel or how they don't feel. So then it's a conflict that I have within with myself, that as an interpreter, if I am just interpreting what the speaker is saying, but not checking on whom I'm interpreting it to or what I'm interpreting the other way around, am I really being ethical in the bigger scheme of things, right? In terms of conveying the message, one, and also in terms of the work that I'm doing as a volunteer. So again, it's a conflict that I have between the different roles that I play, and also the position of the person whom I'm not representing, but interpreting for back and forth. Because when I think of it, the speaker may or may not be in that kind of constrained space that the person who's on the other end is, the community member is.
Gabriel?
Yeah, sorry, I raised my hand and then I put my hand down and then I raised my hand again. Can you all hear me? Okay, I just saw some fuzziness going on. Okay, so there are two things, and this is why I raised my hand, then took it down, then raised it again. I really agreed or felt what you said, Pravina, around there are situations in which people, which can cause people to refuse to communicate their needs. But there are two things that really stood out to me. One, I have always seen interpretation and what I value about interpretation is that we're disappearing into the background. And that if this conversation was happening without us being there, the same situation would be going on. Which means, and as uncomfortable as this sounds and feels even for me, we aren't there to, I don't feel like I would be there to advocate. I think I would definitely check in afterwards and continue interpreting if needed. Like if you still don't understand at the end and you need me there longer to clarify those things, I will do it. But I think what's weird is I feel uncomfortable advocating in that space because that's not my role, unfortunately. And that's an uncomfortable place to be in, but a very important decision to make.
Awesome. So we're going to have Sasa, and then we're going to add another we're going to throw something else in the mix.
Yeah, so I kind of just want to echo what Gabrielle just said. I should have waited, but especially in my line of work where I interpret for majority, like in my spaces, I interpret for asylum seekers, and specifically people with very low literacy, and including those who speak Spanish as a second language, or those who do not have the privilege of going into school. And knowing all of that in play, it really tugs on that heartstrings, but also like the hats of like being an advocate, of knowing they most likely don't know what asylum literally means, like, or the sense of like, okay, I'm an interpreter. It is not my job at this point to educate the person. It is the job of the person who they are meeting with. And again, in ways where I've done that in the past have been like in the pre-session saying, hey, I also have an advocacy role in this play, whether it's at my job where I'm essentially a social worker in these spaces, or if it's, okay, maybe I do need to pause right here to make sure that the person identifies. And I don't have like a really great way of doing it. Sometimes I do it in the pre-session, sometimes I interject at that point, but it's definitely something that's very difficult for me. I just wanted to bring that out. Like, I don't know how this question is supposed to be answered, but it's very, very hard.
So I just want to add one more kind of twist on this, see what you all think, and then maybe Al and I can kind of share some of our thoughts. So same scenario, it's an attorney office, but this time you are a paid interpreter employed by the attorney. So you work at an attorney's office, you're at work, you're interpreting, and you are reading the client's face like, oh shoot, this person is looking so confused. You pause and you say to the attorney, I think that the clients, look, can I check in with the client to make sure they're understanding everything? Agree or disagree?
I want to hear from Monica. You're all over the place. What's going on? This is the problem with Zoom conference calls.
I mean, the same thing. I kind of just like, I understand, you know, like what I should do, but I'm still on the thing that, you know, like that even though I am employed by this person, like if I'm fairly certain, and I mean like 99.9 maybe like percent sure that this person is like seems very confused, then I would really want to address that, because if they're not speaking up at this point and they've been looking confused for a little bit, I just feel like, and then again, you know, it could be another thing and that's just me misconstruing the situation, but I might want to just do like a quick like, do you mind if I take a second, check in with them, like, are you getting this? Cool, continue. I don't know.
Oh boy, Catalina.
I am in that position a lot. I said I agreed every time, and I do that here and there often enough. Sometimes the way I do it is I ask for a chance to check in about if the interpreting's going well, because that way it's kind of on me and it's me checking in about my role. So I tell the attorney, can I check in and make sure that the interpreting's working well? Maybe the client like doesn't understand my accent, or I'm using vocabulary that is regional or some, I don't know, in some possible way. And in that way, the client might share that actually it's just the, you know, what the attorney said, that they're, I don't know, and then I can do it from there. But I figure that's a way to kind of still be in my role and check in. I also find that when you're interpreting with someone, you do also get their body language more than the other person does. So in a way, you are in a position of being able to read things that they're not necessarily physically saying, and that it would behoove everybody to be like acknowledged by the room. But it seems like all these situations kind of just point to there is kind of like already sort of an unjust or like unfair situation in the air, and you're stepping into a role where it kind of falls on you in one way or another. Like if a patient doesn't like want to share a cultural difference with their doctor, this doctor obviously hadn't created like a culturally open space or a space that was cognizant of that. And that's really not on me to remedy, and maybe is just a conversation for later. But this kind of is on that too, where like the person might not want to share with their, I'm talking a lot, I'm sorry, share with their lawyer that they're confused for any number of reasons that might have a lot to do with not feeling comfortable with this person because they hold a power that the person doesn't, or something. But anyway, I rambled, sorry.
No.
That's good.
I think it's interesting to me that that we feel like it falls on us, and I think that as female-identified folks, femme-identified folks, people of color, you know, like all of a sudden it's our issue. And I'm like, is this attorney blind? That's what I'm just thinking. Like, this attorney's not blind. If I am sitting here and I can see this person totally confused, the attorney, I'm assuming, also can see the person and also sees that they're confused. And so I just think it's interesting that maybe it's because what you're saying, right? Like this person's ideas, words, thoughts are passing through my body. I feel it in a different way than the attorney is feeling it. Maybe it's because of the power dynamics. But I just thought that it was interesting that Anna said, like, now I'm complicit with their homophobia. And I was like, well, no, we're just interpreting. Like, we're just interpreting. We're not complicit. And so I just think that it's that these questions have brought that up for me right now.
And I think, you know, we go through these things so that we can really think about, like, is it my role to, like, adjust the meaning? Like they said in translator, but they meant interpreter. I know what they meant. I'm going to fix it there. Do people have the right to just be wrong? Do people have the right to lie to each other? Do they have the right to pull you into that lie? Do they have the right to offend each other? Is your loyalty to protect your mother stronger than your ethic of interpreter? And does that mean that you should or shouldn't be interpreting for your mother in the best case scenario? What does it mean when we're paid and not paid? Does that change who we feel loyal to? And why are we asking ourselves who we're loyal to above and beyond being loyal to the message? These are all decisions that we are constantly making all the time, every day when we're interpreting. And I think Ada and I both often land on, there is one rule that we agree on that's true for interpreting, and it's that it's always in the first person. I said, I did, I went. Not he said, they said, she went. After that, it's a series of decisions that if I could hope that you take anything away, it's that we're always making decisions, and all of our decisions have an impact. And when we pretend like they don't, or when we assume that it's always a positive impact because we're so brilliant and so smart and so helpful and know so much and are so well-intentioned, then we are really not looking at all of the potential negative impacts, taking away of people's agency, not giving the people right to be quiet and quiet and quiet until one day they explode and they say what they think and they needed to get there on their own time. We're making all these decisions. And so for me, when I'm in the role of an interpreter, I just remind myself before I go in, I believe in interpretation because I believe in self-determination. That means that whatever this person does, I am here to repeat it into the other language. Punto. That's it. That is kind of the principle that I try to honor to make it easier to grapple with that long series of decisions.
And so I think what we are going to leave you all with tonight is for you to think about what is it that you want to honor when you are an interpreter. When you are in the role of the interpreter, what is it that you are going to try to honor? See? So we're going to leave it there. We have our last session next week. And hopefully this like preps us for next week, see? So keep thinking about it. Yeah, think about this, like what you want to like hold dear to your heart and what interpreting means to you, like what's at the bottom of interpreting for you. And we'll see you next Wednesday, compas. Listo.
Good night, everybody.
Bye. Thank you all.